Hello, everyone, and welcome to Collision Repair Magazine's Industry Insider Radio, a podcast for shops, shop owners, techs, and every level of the collision repair industry. I'm your host, James Kerr. Insurance guidelines, OEM specifications, every little shop process. There's so much to keep track of in today's collision repair shop, and it's changing all the time. So why should we add one more thing to that pile? Well, in this case, it's because it can save you money and help build a better industry. Today, we're talking with Paul Prochilo, CEO of Simplicity Car Care, about environmental social governance, how making steps to deal with the climate crisis can actually help your collision repair business. It's higher profits for less carbon. Today on Industry Insider Radio. This episode is brought to you by Simplicity Car Care. Simplicity Car Care is focused on making car care simple and affordable for every vehicle owner in the world. Simplicity is the one-stop shop for all your vehicle maintenance needs. When you want to get your vehicle back on the road faster, turn to Simplicity Car Care. For more information on Simplicity, please visit simplicitycarcare.ca. Hello, Paul. You're joining me today. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, James. I'm really well, thank you, and real pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
That's great. So let's start off by telling me a little bit about yourself and why you're here.
Sure, James. So, just starting out, as you may have already covered, I'm the one of the co-founders and CEO of Simplicity Car Care. We are one of Canada's fastest growing collision repair networks. And as mentioned in your intro, we are focused on making car care simple and affordable for every vehicle owner in the world, while increasing the performance and profitability and ultimately quality of life for every one of our simplifiers. And those are our franchisees who join the system. And, that brings us back now to the discussion around, ESG, environmental and social governance, and specifically, yielding higher profits with less carbon. And we're really excited to, as an organization and as a leadership team, to be a front runner in what we are putting together, and our ambitions are to act as an inspiration for not only the remainder of the collision repair industry, but for organizations around the world, from a best-in-class or gold seal perspective on combating the climate crisis.
Okay, at first glance, it seems kind of counterintuitive. And I'd love to get into why Simplicity specifically has such an interest in this. But let's first tie together collision repair shops. Mm-hmm. On the surface, climate change doesn't seem to relate directly to the business of restoring vehicles to pre-accident condition. Like, shops have to really focus on, how do we get this car in? How do we get this car out? Why should a collision repair shop care about climate change more broadly, but a technical term like environmental social governance?
Yeah, great question. So, I'll just start from Simplicity's perspective and then kind of dial it in, because our paradigm is really the outlook that we have on combating the climate crisis. So, number one, when we're talking, so right now we're looking at, the globe is warming, and the real pressure point is if we hit 1.5 degrees global temperature increase before where it's projected between 2040 and 2050, right? And so greenhouse gas emissions act as a layer. They're actually good because they help keep the Earth warm. What happens is they form a bubble which compress heat and hold it from just skipping off or abandoning into space, which keeps the globe warm. But the problem is we're having too many greenhouse gas emissions and we're getting too warm too quickly. So when you look at the after effect, if you're going to prioritize it, you just got to tie in ESG and specifically environmental governance into anything you love. So we know that if we don't have a fundamental change in the amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced by 2050, it's going to get to a point where it's irreversible. And, many of us probably won't even be around to deal with the aftermath. But it's pretty easy if you love your church or place of worship, you love your family, you love the next generation, maybe you love animals. It's very easy for you to find your why when you tie it into Earth and our time here while we're spending it. So that's the number one, because it just ties into everything. But, a lot of collision operators and even ourselves, we take that perspective, and wanting to become a global enterprise means that we have to be stewards of every community we serve. And we need to ensure that we're leaving our footprint in a better space than we found it. So this made sense to us if we're going to continue to grow and have global expansion. But when you're dealing with an independent collision operator, sometimes they just have a different perspective on it. And they're like, well, I just don't see the connect, right? They clearly do, following some discussion. But what we found was the tremendous business case that can be put towards decarbonization. So I'll share just a couple of quick examples with you here, James.
Hold on, let's see if we can, because I think that some of those are going to come up. But sure. just to recap, Simplicity's perspective is social responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And the
responsibility, the very key word.
Yeah, and then the shop perspective, we can see them saying, "Well, listen, that's all well and good, but I've got to focus on my day to day." And what you're saying in response is actually paying attention to this can benefit your day to day, right?
100%.
Yeah. Okay.
And, again, some of the work that we did, because, you've got to have, if you're going to have change management happen effectively, we like to set up a guiding coalition. So we had our leadership team fully behind it, all of our corporate staff. We have to share the vision, communicate the vision, and develop that sense of urgency of a why. And not only what's going to occur in 2 or 3 decades from now, but look at the inflationary pressures we're having. Look at the administrative costs that continue to rise for a collision center to be effective today. So we did some homework and we found numerous sources, but a few I will give a shout out to is a blog that looks at ESG sustainability called Alpha Sense. And they identified that 79% of U.S. companies in the S&P earned a higher return on their carbon reduction investment than from their overall capital deployment or CapEx deployment. They also found that where energy efficiency improvements were deployed, they had 196% average payback within 2 to 3 years, right? So for us, we firmly believe that we have to know where we currently stand. And then essentially, decarbonization is synonymous with lean manufacturing. Less inputs going in to process the same output, right? So how can we use less resources to continue to deliver better quality with more efficiency?
Well, we're talking, climate aside, we're talking about better efficiency measures for the industry, period, right? Does that seem to be a big part of what we're discussing? Because sometimes the environment, I love those animals too. I really want the tigers to survive, but it can be hard to feel a sense of urgency when we're talking about something 30 years from now, and we've got to get a car fixed today. Discovering how that sense of urgency can inform the right now, I think, is the hurdle, is the stumbling block. Do collision repair shops necessarily notice the climate effects, or is it just what we all notice, like rising inflation and problems with shipping, and, there's a rising ocean level is eliminating small islands, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying it's hard to care about a small island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, but, we're feeling a crunch in this industry. And when you're trying to focus on a car, it's harder to care about the island. But what you're saying is the things that we do that help the environment and help our carbon footprint are also things that are going to make us money.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And where that stands is when we're looking at, and now we're going to speak directly to collision repairs, and we're going to turn this right into KPIs in terms that they will all be very aware of. And I can tell you that our first assessment And we'll get into how you further this for your journey. But at a high level, we had to understand where we stood first, right? So we did some research, understood what were the levers that are really pulling, right? So repair versus replace is one of the most important leading indicators for our organization, not only from an efficiency and a profitability, but from an ESG perspective, right? Because what we understood and found is we all know the more we repair, again, and covering all OEM repair procedures. I'll put that out there because safety goes before anything else, right? But when OEM repair procedures are considered and potentially customer compliance, if you're dealing with fleets or insurance companies, when you have both of those put in as an overlay, we know that obviously repairing, you're going to have higher gross profit margins, you're going to have reduced cycle time, increased throughput. And all of those are amazing for the collision center. But you reduce 66% of your carbon footprint when you repair versus replace. Because now your collision center doesn't inherit the manufacturing to produce the part, the carbon emissions to haul the part, the carbon emissions to store the part. Those all get accounted for and are tagged onto you when you purchase that part, because that's a part of your repair, right? So seeing how the first three impact your P&L and your balance sheet immediately, we found that was more than enough to get alignment with our collision repair centers. And I frankly think a collision repair center in across the globe. But then we look at other efficiencies like BOC compliance and how much paint are we mixing and what's the wastage. And because decarbonization, again, I'll summarize it, is synonymous with lean. When you have less reduce, quicker throughput, better management of inventories, all of these costs begin to become compressed. And with that, your carbon footprint is also being compressed. So you're winning on both ends.
Well, now is the time when everybody's really thinking, I think, about repair versus replace, right? Because we had, for the longest time, everybody was leaning into replace because it meant that you could have more, not necessarily quicker turnaround times, but you could manage your time schedule better, maybe. But then the pandemic happened, you couldn't get parts, right? Everybody had to shift their focus and be like, oh, what can we use? Oh, I guess adhesives are really fancy now, and try to find other ways to repair. But I think everybody in the shops is still thinking about what the balance is, finding the right balance of repair versus replace. But you're saying that we have to keep in mind the factor that we can't see, which is how big of an impact repair is having on the entire infrastructure of the industry, and therefore
100%. But I mean, and for a collision repairer who's really focusing on the day-to-day and they're within their collision center, maybe that's not even a priority to them. That's why we ask to dial in and focus on what happens. Like each market, Canadian market, even within the province, can be plus or minus a few percentage points. But we know that if you can repair, you're going to 2.5x your gross margin versus that part, right? You're going to reduce the balance sheet on your payables because you've been able to absorb that labor internally and replace it. Your parts to labor ratio is going to fall. You're going to look better on your customer scorecards, whether they're insurance or fleet, and allow yourself to actually, through performance, increase market share. It's like there's a lot of levers that this impacts if we just sit back and look at it. First, I say strategically and globally, and then let's dial it down and always ask, well, what's in it for me? So what's in it for me if I make these changes, right? So,
okay, well, I can tell you
a lot of customers that we're working with, both on a fleet and insurer perspective, they all want to know what our climate change commitment is. And listen, large institutions find this as a very attractive component as a vendor, because it just speaks to the high level of governance that you have in your organization.
Okay, so repair versus replace, that's one lever that they can pull, that people can pull to make more money, that will also impact climate change. If I'm a shop and I'm trying my best and I've got my head down and I'm doing everything that I can, how do I know what kind of effect I've got on the environment versus the
Yeah,
shop next to me?
great question. So you can't manage what you don't measure, right? So suggestion number one, I'm going to share what Simplicity did. We were very enthusiastic. We did a lot of homework, but we didn't know it all. So we hired a consultant to come on board to help us, right? And there's a number of different consultants across the Canadian landscape, right? The charges, the fees for the consultation were very reasonable. And with that, what happens is the consultant is going to just help you with your carbon accountancy dashboard. So just like the P&L of your business, just like your balance sheet, we're going to start to measure and understand what's your current carbon intensity or your benchmark, right?
Is that the
And then
same
we're going
thing
to
as
start to work on how do we reduce it year over year?
yeah? Is that the same thing as a footprint, a carbon footprint? Are they
Yeah,
roughly
it's your
equivalent?
carbon intensity
Okay,
metric. Yeah,
because I've heard that
absolutely.
term flying around. I just
Yeah.
didn't know if that was the same thing. All right, so
James, just one last point on that. I think it's important for everyone to know that, the climate crisis didn't occur in a year and it's not going to be corrected in a year, right? And that's why it takes the long term approach of everyone making the right business decisions and the right impact on your own business so we can really cascade this and snowball it into a significant impact.
yeah, well, let's play ideal world here. Like, ideally, you want to make a change that will have a good long-term effect and a good short-term effect, right? And
For
if
sure.
if shops can be making smart changes that will help their profitability as well, that's a good short-term effect. And then it's just a case of, do you feel that social responsibility to make those changes? Well, even if you don't, profitability is something that
I,
we're all chasing,
I've
right?
spoke to a number of different collision centers, and I even most recently was able to speak at an association event within a market, within a province in the Canadian market. And that exact question came up, and many repairers were like, "Well, how am I going to think about 30 years from now?" And they couldn't wrap their head around the longer term. I was like, "Then don't. Let's just focus on your profitability today." Because I can tell you, if you're going to hit these different levers, you're going to impact the climate crisis in a very profound way. But let's hit singles and doubles. Let's not look for the home run. Let's just enhance your profitability the whole way through. And because we're putting less inputs into the same output, it's gonna equal a plus on your gross margin, your EBITDA, your enterprise value. Another piece that we share is that this is going to increase the valuation of your business. So when you look for an exit, you're going to get a deeper premium than you normally would. A lot of great benefits.
Well, it's a good feeling to do something good and have it have it not work against you as well, right? So we talked about repair versus replace as one lever that shops can do. What are some other simple steps that collision repair shops can take in order to embrace what's the term again? Your environmental social governance.
Well, yeah. So in order to reduce your carbon footprint,
Okay,
and
reduce your carbon footprint.
ESG is the policy in which you can get there. So environmental, social, and corporate governance. But a few of the biggest levers we found, all the data that we've been working on and rolling up our network. So repair versus replace was a big one. Supply chain purchases. So it's like, how can we identify how to reduce the SKU of products? Is there overlap? Are we carrying too much inventory? Are there redos where we're having to mix more VOCs through the paint? Even they're waterborne, there's still chemicals innate in your even your clear coat specifically. So redos that cost us money, increase our carbon footprint, and how can we streamline the way we work with our supply chain? Because again, we inherit their footprint in what they're delivering parts to paint to us, right? So is there a way that we can shore up to suggest, hey, supply chain, I want to reduce how much it costs for you to service me. I want to make sure I'm getting my purchases once a week so you don't have to visit me as much. And the beauty there is that when we reduce windshield time and we reduce the overall cost for a supplier to service you, well, maybe there's another negotiation you can have around a gain share on some of that. And can I get a bonus at a credit at the end of the month because of how much I've reduced the cost of serving my collision center? So again, ties right back into profitability.
During the pandemic, I was talking to a lot of shops that had to develop local relationships with part sourcing, as opposed to, they never, in some cases, they admitted they never would have even thought about how far away it's coming. They just care about how long it's going to be, which sometimes meant that it was coming from very far away. But if things weren't available, like, it made the difference if you could phone somebody up who you could drive to in order to source a part. And one thing I think is very interesting is that as the effects of the pandemic are fading, people still have those local relationships.
Yeah.
And they're still leveraging local relationships, because transportation and like the whole supply chain, even in a broader sense, I'm sure has a huge impact on the environment and that carbon footprint.
Of course it does. Yeah. And especially, and again, back to a collision center's profitability. So, we work with our OEM retail partners, and we ask for, basically all of our supply chain, we want 100% order fill, right? I don't want to be holding parts. I don't want my AP starting if I can't repair that vehicle. And I want to reduce your cost of servicing me. So I'm going to ask for a 100% order fill only, right? And again, those have tremendous impacts on pretty much every facet of your business, inclusive of reducing your carbon footprint.
Sometimes I order something off the internet, and I think it's something very small that's coming, and it comes in a big, huge box, and it turns out to be all waste. Some shops have told me that similar things, like, why did they ship this one dumb thing now when they could have combined it in? So a lot of this to me sounds like a refining process that was maybe going to have to happen within the industry anyway.
Absolutely. And they have just pulled forward what are maybe necessities that were overlooked already. And really, from an entire ecosystem, we need to look at, just how much more effective can we be in what we're doing? Because again, the least amount of input going into the same output increases your profitability and decreases your carbon footprint. So I think we've touched it on so many times. What a profound business case there is in ensuring that you are being a gold standard steward of the community that you're serving.
That's certainly a way to stand out against the competition these days, is becoming a part of your community. I mean, it's always been a part of the business, right? Is being a part of your community. But
of course. And I'd be lying if I didn't say we don't have significant marketing plans put in place to be able to share that with communities that we're serving. So,
I mean, my little league baseball team was the local collision repair shop, right? And there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Now let's look ahead to the future. So sometime in the future, let's say 2045, what's going to be the difference between a shop that adopted these environmentally conscious practices and the one that didn't?
Yeah. So I think there's going to be a few pieces that change in the landscape. And, firstly, you're going to have organizations that have deeper relationships with their supply chain than ever. Today, it's very important. But if you really want to get really good at decarbonization, it requires deeper relationships in your supply chain, because supply chain accounts in collision repair, what we're seeing, supply chain can account anywhere for 60 to 70% of our carbon footprint, right? So you really want to make sure that you've got significant relationships there and buy-in with your supply chain. I think you're going to see that locations that have taken a significant stand in combating the climate crisis are going to have significantly reduced client acquisition costs. And the reason being, again, I'm seeing it from our own fleet partners who are questioning us and saying, hey, listen, we're looking to become net zero. We understand you have a plan. What does yours look like? Because pretty soon there's going to be a cutoff in the coming years that if you don't have a plan in place, there's a small chance you'll be able to even submit for the RFP, right? And we're seeing this with different fleet companies. Insurers are being pressured today on their commercial clients that they insure, right? Because of the risk, they're now going to their own customers and saying, hey, big plants, we've got to work on decarbonization here. What are the plans? So they're working actively with their customers. As members of their prospective supply chain, we hold close to 60 to 70% of their carbon footprint in scope 3. So being able to demonstrate this differentiation, I think is just going to set you up as a very progressive member of their strategic value chain or vendor chain for sure.
So you don't have to answer this. This is just me dreaming based on what you're saying. But we tried going as global as we possibly could as an industry, right? And I think over the last few years we've seen there's a lot of advantages to that, and there can be some disadvantages. We can be made vulnerable by a global supply chain, and as we go towards a future where we need to find that sweet spot in each of these aspects of the industry between how far things are going and how much we want them to travel and how much carbon we want to burn in trying to do something, do you think that will lead to local manufacturing, like manufacturing in other aspects, like within the industry coming home and then not having to go so far and wide across the world?
I think that's definitely a consideration and an opportunity. As we saw through COVID, there was a ton of obvious resiliency that needs to be built into supply chain, right? So we're seeing it still today. We're still living through some of it. It's getting better, but it's nowhere near where we optimal levels. So I could see that happening for sure. Again, I don't know how big of an impact that carries because of still the inputs that need to be applied and the aggregation of raw materials that need to be inputted, right? So
Yeah.
it may not have a tremendous impact on decarbonization, but it will help the supply chain issues, I'm sure.
Well, it just makes me think because I'm thinking about the pandemic and how people behaved, how shops behaved in the pandemic, forming local relationships. And there's definitely a role for the international market to play. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's wonderful. I think it's really neat how we can all come together in an industry. But also, I feel like we were looking so far in one direction. The pandemic was kind of scary. It shook us all up as an industry and made us think, okay, what's really going to be the best practice going forward? And a lot of these carbon footprint practices, I feel like, are trying to find that sweet spot of like, well, maybe we don't need daily deliveries. Maybe we don't need that. Like maybe in fact, it's going to be like we would have thought 10 years ago, wow, daily deliveries, I can get so much more done. Right. But maybe it's just not worth the amount of trucks, running around with all the stuff.
Yeah. And the other thing is that we looked at when you're talking about inventory supplies that you're carrying. And this helps us dial into, what we call Kanban or minimum maximum systems, and starts to build more structure in your collision repair center. Because if you need to see a member of supply chain every single day, well, chances are you're just not keeping an optimal level on your supplies, and a significant chance that you're missing on-time delivery targets because you're waiting on something. And the supplier needs to keep coming back and running to see you every single day. So shoring that up will also alleviate pain points in your operating model. So it's just a ton of opportunity.
Yeah, it's just so hard to know because if you can make all the numbers work, then it was a success and you made all the numbers work. But if there are things that you can know that can tighten up those numbers, sometimes it's not obvious. And to me, I'm like, oh, okay, well, if the truck's only coming once a week, that means something else has to wait. But no, you're right. If you've got better processes in place in the first place and a better sense of anticipating parts ordering what you need and a good supply, a fair supply with what's around you, a lot to think about. Gosh.
Yeah, absolutely. And what everyone needs to remember is that, like everything else, this is not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's a journey, right? And you can have some very, very significant impacts in short order on your collision center, on your operation overall, on your operational and your financial results. But you've got to start by, even if you didn't know your carbon intensity, let's start with some of these other metrics, these leading indicators like What's my repair versus replace? Where's my gross profit in my paint? Am I not making the margins I should because I'm not effective enough? These are substantial starting points, and then starting to build out, like having LED lighting in your collision center. Well, again, will reduce your costs, reduce the amount of energy consumption, reducing your carbon emissions. So lots of different opportunities and ways. Some things we're looking at is using infrared technology to cure a vehicle instead of gas to heat up an entire booth. Can I just concentrate it on 2 or 3 panels? Use a lot less energy, cleaner energy instead of gas, right? Again, I'm putting cars out faster. I'm using less. Oh, wow. And my carbon footprint's decreasing on every repair. Wow, this sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think every shop has been there with you mixed how much paint, we threw how much out.
Yeah.
And nobody wants that, right?
No, no, absolutely not.
And getting it down to a lean process, I think, is good advice for anybody. So you're suggesting it starts with an assessment of carbon footprint. It starts with what are we doing? Where are we? Like, how are we? And I think that's going to be a wake up call for a lot of shops, even shops that are doing very well, of like, well, let's look at paint waste. Let's look at transportation waste. Let's look at, because really what we're talking about at the end of the day is waste, right?
100%.
Yeah, nobody's talking about ceasing or curbing or curtailing shop operations. We're just talking about reducing the waste in what you do, and that can also have a huge impact in your carbon footprint in the environment. It sounds like good advice for anyone. So,
well, that's why I say decarbonization. Let's demystify it. It's really lean in practice, and if you're being consistent about it, like it takes to cut down an oak tree. You don't hit it in one swipe. You got to just keep hacking away at it, and you're going to see some profound impact everywhere.
Oh, this is reducing carbon footprint. We want to plant an oak tree. We don't want to cut down.
Now, there you go. Yeah, very well. Very well put, James. Absolutely.
So, what tools and resources can people get? Like, where can they go to learn more about this? If they're like, oh, hey, that sounds pretty interesting. Maybe I want to adopt that for my shop. What is the next step for them?
Yeah. So I would, first off, you want to understand kind of your why, long term and short term, right? And you've got to have that vision that your organization is going to live by. And the reason being is that things won't always go exactly as planned. So you need an anchor, something that's going to anchor us on the short and the long range benefits as to the why. Right. And there's a lot you could identify there: profitability, increased sales, marketability, enterprise value, better governance. There's so much, right? And then you've got to start a benchmark. You got to start to know where you are. So I would look up carbon accountancy or carbon accounting firms in Canada. They're all over the place: Toronto, Calgary. Like we hired one from the UK. Because in the United Kingdom, they are the most stringent globally on net zero, and we wanted someone who not only was making sure to meet the 2040 requirement out of the United Kingdom, but someone who was also directly in collision repair. So we found a consultant who fit both, which we thought was amazing. But any carbon consultant will be able to show you, even without their collision repair experience, exactly what you need to do. And you'll understand how that positively impacts your business.
Well, without being coy, Paul, given your position as CEO of Simplicity, but does Simplicity help with this, or can Simplicity get involved with shops at all?
Absolutely. I mean, my contact information, you can reach out to our director of sales, Greg Wing, and that's exactly what we do. So we're helping our 85 locations roll up right now. We're adding this into these requirements into our, franchise agreements, because that's just the level of commitment we're making. And if anyone wants to join our organization, we're going to show you how and why, the most important piece with the short and mid-rate and long-term benefits. But this is a commitment that you need to make to become a simplifier.
So this is a part of the deal. for coming
Absolutely.
into Simplicity. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. That's
And my information's there. I'm not hard to find. Paul Prochilo. You can find me on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, anything I can do to help, or any resources I might be able to guide a collision center into finding some information, I'm more than willing to do this, because at the end of the day, Simplicity Car Care is going to be a pioneer. From our current understanding, we are the only collision repair network in North America that have taken the stand on a climate change commitment to be net zero by 2045. But, we're proud of that, and we're going to blaze the path. But the fact of the matter is, to have the impact that I want us to have, we can't do it on our own. Simplicity Car Care can't fix every car in the world, even if we wanted to. So more collision repair centers, more networks that are supporting their collision repair networks to taking these steps is going to help us really have some significant impact and change. And that's what Simplicity is. We're a high impact organization. So if I can help anyone along the way, I'm always available.
Yeah, Paul, I don't want to toot your horn or anything, but I can't think of another company in the collision repair sector who is spearheading such an environmental consciousness.
Yeah. Thank you. We're proud of that. We're very proud of it. This just was a no-brainer for us to get very excited about and put as many resources as we can behind this initiative.
Well, good for you. Good for Simplicity. Like it's just responsibility, right? Like you want to make sure there's a world there.
Yeah, I'm a father of an 18-month daughter, and I don't think you need to have children, but in my case, I look at what could happen if we don't have this climate crisis corrected by 2050, and it just doesn't leave me feeling good to know that, or the thought of not taking a stance and not doing something doesn't sit well with me, knowing that my daughter will need to inherit it.
Yeah.
So that's my drive. That's my why every single day.
It's well put. Like as an industry, not collision repair specifically, but like the oil industries are not always the most environmentally conscious, and we want to have a better world. We want to have a clean world. We want to have a world that our kids are going to be proud of. And what can we do? Like, does it feel like a drop in the bucket? I don't know. I keep remembering about that starfish analogy, the little kid throwing starfish back into the ocean, and the person says, well, you can't get them all. They're all washed up on the shore. And the kid says, it matters to that one, throws it back in. It matters to that one.
Right.
And with Simplicity as a network, that's a lot of starfish. You have
and with our global ambitions, we believe that we are going to display, in our opinion, what the gold seal looks like on decarbonization, and we challenge all members of the collision repair community to join us. Watch us if you wish. Call me if you'd like some info, but join us. Right? Find yourself a consultant, because it's a little much for us to unpackage on our own. The investment pales into comparison of the financial impact. So,
well, I think it's the right thing to do, but also, my heart goes out to shops who are trying to make ends meet, who are trying to get everything done. And if there can be short-term solutions that can lead to better processes, that can lead to a better world too, then holy cow, like that seems to be a good plan.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the approach we took.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Paul. Is there anything else you want to say to the listening audience about this whole, like, we're talking about the whole world at this point?
Yeah, we are. And I just want to say, for those listening, thank you for your audience. This is an important message. I appreciate James and Collision Repair for allowing us to share this message. And ultimately, if you don't believe in a climate crisis, if you don't believe that the world's actually heating up and there isn't an issue, and maybe you think I'm too radical, hey, not a problem. We could agree to disagree. But I think one point that we can't disagree on is that collision repair centers are having constraints and more pressure on their margins and profitability than ever before. So if there's an opportunity to improve that, don't listen to me and my tremendous vision of having net zero across the entire globe, we hope, by 2045. Let's just focus on your operation. And let me reassure you, if you look into it deep enough, you will find that decarbonization equals greater profitability. And I wish you the best of luck to each and every one of the listeners.
Thank you very much, Paul Prochilo, CEO of Simplicity Car Care, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for joining me today on Collision Repair Magazine's Industry Insider. We heard from Paul Prochilo, CEO of Simplicity Car Care. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening: Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or YouTube. And tune in next time for another episode of Industry Insider Radio. I'm James Kerr. Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by Simplicity Car Care. Simplicity Car Care is focused on making car care simple and affordable for every vehicle owner in the world. Simplicity is the one-stop shop for all your vehicle maintenance needs. When you want to get your vehicle back on the road faster, turn to Simplicity Car Care. For more information on Simplicity, please visit simplicitycarcare.ca.